Welcome back to the Gains for Girls podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you check us out anywhere where you get your podcasts, like and subscribe. Be sure to check us out at OutKick.com. But I was asked a few days ago, is actually for an OutKick special. These clips will be running through different daily shows like Charlie's or Tommy's, Dan's. But I was asked who I thought the most patriotic Americans were. And a couple names pretty immediately came to mind, right? I thought about people like John Rich or Kid Rock or Dana White. But then I really started thinking about what it means to be patriotic. This is a person who loves their country and is ready to and actively and boldly supports and defends their country. And that is when I thought of today's guest, Attorney General Bailey of Missouri. I swear to you, I go on Twitter or X, and every day he is announcing more litigation that he is filing against those who seek to destroy and dismantle our freedoms and our constitutional rights. On top of how he serves, I guess, Americans and Missourians in the courtroom, he served this country in the U.S. Army. And so Attorney General Bailey, he is the epitome of a patriot, and I could not be more excited for our conversation. You can expect to hear about big tech, censorship, what we are seeing by the Supreme Court as it pertains to the presidential election, Title IX, all things student loans, and how fitting, considering that this is the week that we celebrate our independence and our founding principles. So check out the interview with Attorney General Andrew Bailey here. Attorney General Bailey, before we get into anything, I just wanted to thank you, really. You have been one of the most, if not the most, proactive and efficient and thorough figures on the front lines, fighting for what it means, or at least what it has historically meant to be an American. So on behalf of what I would imagine all sane Missourians, and broader than that, really Americans, thank you.
Well, thank you, getting to appear on your show and be able to speak with you, who's been an individual who's led and been a clarion call in the wilderness on so many of these important issues across the United States. It's really humbling for me. My service in the United States Army after college, but before law school, taught me how important it is to be bold, be courageous, fight for what's right, and to the execution matters. And so, there's different kinds of attorneys. There's kind of the academic law school tough, and then there's the kind of the warrior tough. And I want to be a warrior tough attorney who's willing to take the fight to the enemies of freedom, safety, and prosperity. And I feel that during my time as AG, we've been able to.
No doubt. That is definitely what I have witnessed from outside looking in. I mean, even just in the last week, we have seen some huge wins, even on a national scale, that can be partly, or I would say majorly, attributed to your efforts. And so I want you to walk us through some of your involvement, the state of Missouri's involvement in combating the weaponization of the government against President Trump and the wins that we have seen even over the past week or two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's really three main strategic objectives in this fight. First and foremost, you see, let me start with this. God gave us rights as humans. Our Constitution protects those rights from the government, and the purpose of the government is to protect those rights. So the Constitution protects us from the government should be protecting our rights. And yet, under the Biden administration, as the left has, infiltrated so many apparatuses of state, local, and federal government, you see a weaponization of the government against individuals in order to deny them of their constitutional rights. And that has never been more evident than in their persecution of President Trump. And that persecution has taken many forms. The most recent and immediate that we see is the prosecution of President Trump in the state of New York. This was an illicit witch hunt prosecution. It was never supported by facts and law. The prosecutors were politically motivated, meaning they should have been disqualified from those cases. The indictment itself is a violation of the notice requirement under the Due Process Clause. There was a First Amendment violation when the judge ordered President Trump to speak on any issue related to the trial. Well, this is a presidential candidate in the heat of a campaign. And we have a First Amendment right as citizens of Missouri and the United States to hear from a presidential candidate. So our rights were violated as well. And then they'll have unanimity under the Sixth Amendment as it relates to determining what the predicate offense is when the jury was deliberating. So the goal here, the prosecutors, was never to obtain a legally valid conviction. The goal was always to take President Trump off the campaign trail and silence him. And Missourians have a sovereign interest in participating in a national presidential election on equal footing. We can't let a rogue prosecutor and a collusive judiciary in New York destroy our rights as Missourians to participate in that national election. That's why we're filing suit, Missouri versus New York. It's going directly to the United States Supreme Court. Our founding fathers contemplated that there would be disputes amongst the states, and those disputes would be resolved at the highest court in the land. I'm proud to say that suit will be on file this week, and we're doing everything we can to ensure Missourians have a right to participate freely and fairly in the national presidential election.
Amazing. Yeah, your office has been steadfast in protecting our First Amendment rights. We live in a time where our First Amendment rights, they're constantly under attack. And weirdly enough, in the name of progress or equality, I see this weekly, if not daily, in my own personal life, right? Meta censors me. TikTok deletes my videos. They don't stay up longer than 10 minutes. Eventbrite, that's another one. They have historically removed my events, yet allow pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist groups to keep their events up. And so talk about the case. You mentioned New York, but what about the case that you brought that made its way up to the highest courts? There was a recent ruling, and so what that means for the president and what that means for the American people.
Yeah, and I think this is really the second strategic objective in the fight against the weaponization of government. And you see it in government censorship on big tech social media platforms. The case, of course, Missouri v. Weaponization that was filed a few years ago. We obtained a preliminary discovery that identified and enumerated a relationship of coercion and collusion from the administration across a spectrum of bureaucratic agencies targeting conservative voices for censorship on big tech social media comments. We took evidence to court and obtained a preliminary injunction on the 4th of July last year, defended it twice at the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the case was already the Supreme Court in March of this year. The Supreme Court just last week handed down its decision. The media would have you believe that censorship is okay and that the court sided with President. That's not true at all. Those headlines are incredibly deceitful and misleading, deceiving at a minimum. I will tell you that what the court found is that there was absolutely government censorship on big tech social media platforms in violation of the First Amendment. That is precedent that we have. What we really found is that because the case had been sitting on docket for the past year collecting dust, we didn't have current evidence that the censorship is ongoing, and they sent us back down to the trial court to get more evidence, which we will do. Our discovery tools at the trial court at this stage in the litigation are much more broad and deep than they were in the preliminary phase. So we will root out the bad censorship enterprise. And to anyone who says, well, the government censorship was unique to 2020, 2021, it's not going on anymore. Show me one instance in history when the government was able to reduce its size and ceased that kind of illicit behavior. It always grows in a vacuum. And so we know it's there. We will find it. We will root it out, and we will go back to court and obtain another injunction. That fight for free speech goes on.
Amazing. Yeah. Unfortunately, we are left to deal with this growing government. You mentioned media. We talked about suppression and censorship at the national level, right, within the presidential election. But you mentioned media, and it reminds me of just yet another case that you have brought. And this one is against Media Matters. Media Matters, they're truly their own worst enemy. Everything they post, I look at it and it seems satirical. For example, the president of Media Matters, he just recently was in an interview, and he said that the media is getting it all wrong, that it's actually President Trump who has mentally declined, and that the debate showed how bad Trump's cognitive decline really is. They just had a large layoff. I digress, whatever. But they have a history of refusing to cooperate with investigations. You brought a case. They've now, you and I believe Attorney General, now Governor Landry of Louisiana, but they've now essentially, what they've done is stonewalled y'all's investigation into their fraudulent practices. And another important case as it pertains to free speech and how Missouri is fighting back. And so can you walk us through what Media Matters is doing, and again, how it affects everyday people?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is the fight for the First Amendment right to free, fair, and open debate. The First Amendment protects a competition of ideas where the people, you and I, get to determine what is and isn't true based on that free, fair, and open debate, the competition of ideas. What the left wants to do, whether it be government censorship, private censorship, that type of pressure market manipulation campaigns, is to shut down debate. They want to silence any voice in opposition to their ideals. They'll do it through government censorship. They'll do it through the big tech social media platforms, internal censorship policies, which I think are even more threatening. It's scary more rebellion than anything Joseph Stalin could have controlled, because when Stalin shut down a newspaper, everyone would be done it. But when you have de-emphasized, de-platformed, being off social media, you and your listeners and viewers may not know that for several days. And so the people who have been receiving your message, their lives have also been violated, and they may never know. And what the evidence shows the Media Matters did is that they juxtaposed controversial speech on X, formerly known as Twitter, with private advertisers in an attempt to bully those advertisers into withdrawing some X. Why would they do that? They're manipulating the marketplace in order to destroy one of the leftist platforms dedicated to free speech in the United States of America. It's a new trend in the life of free speech, and it's an evolving problem set. And I think that the two recent decisions that have come down within the last few days from the Supreme Court, Missouri v. Biden, and the net choice cases that just came down today, indicate that the problem set is evolving. And as state attorneys general, in order to protect consumers and protect the marketplace from accommodations and restraint of trade, that attorneys general need to find new and creative ways to use the levers of authority to ensure that there's transparency in that market.
Yeah, no, makes sense. It's interesting to hear your perspective. Obviously, I'm not someone who studied law, and so to be able to hear you explain it so clearly is important. I think, again, just your everyday person needs to hear that. But look, you're suing Planned Parenthood. You're suing Media Matters. You said the state of New York, the Biden administration, and several different departments, including the Department of Education, over the illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX. Dozens of officials in the federal government. Back to the Title IX stuff. You've been big on the student loan stuff as well, student debt. But back to the Title IX stuff. Something I thought was so unique. This issue, the issue of men competing in women's sports, is labeled and portrayed as one that is incredibly divisive. It is portrayed as something that is polarizing. But what we saw after President Biden announced this new Title IX rewrite, this rollout, we saw 26 attorney generals, 26 different states suing the Biden administration. I don't think we see, again, I'm not in the same position clearly that you are, but there's hardly, I would imagine, that same unity over a lot of issues. And so why is it that this issue of Title IX and the rewrite, again, the illegal administrative rewrite that we have seen, why is it that so many are suing the Biden administration, so many AGs?
Well, I think it's because we love the Constitution and the rule of law. It has served our democratic republic for over 200 years. And I mean, people like myself who fought in the war on terror and any conflict or took note to protect and defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic, take it seriously when we see these kinds of attacks on the Constitution, our constitutional structure, and the rule of law. Let me go back to student loans real quick before I shift to Title IX, just to say this. That really, when I was talking about the three strategic fronts in the weaponization of government, I think that is an underrated and underappreciated third front, in the sense that President Biden was already told no once before by the United States Supreme Court, and to Plan B, which they're still enabling legislation through Congress. And that was the point that the Supreme Court made the first time they told him no. He's now willfully defying the Supreme Court. It's a constitutional crisis. And all he's trying to do is buy votes. That's yet another form of weaponization of government. So you see prosecution of President Trump. You see censorship on any platform. And then you see this kind of like offense on the other side. It's an incredibly dangerous dark day in our republic when the federal government, from the chief executive, President Biden, is weaponizing government like that. Title IX. For 50 years, Title IX has stood for the proposition that women should have equal access and opportunity to athletic competitions. And we have celebrated this in so many different ways. So many great female athletes over the decades who've been champions, and that we've been able to celebrate and watch and cheer on. And yet what President Biden has attempted to do with the flick of a pen, without any authorization from Congress, is to rewrite our law. It's illegal, and it perverts the original understanding of the law, which is that it's supposed to protect women, not authorize men to participate in women's sports. That's absurd. And so I think him essentially like rewriting the law with the flick of a pen without any say-so from the people's elected representatives in Congress is unconstitutional, and it flies in the face of the plain text of the statute, and it undermines the rule of law for him to convince people that he can do this. And you're right. I mean, there's been largely unanimous voice against this because people want to protect the sanctity of women's sports and the rule of law.
Of course. I mean, listening to you explain all of these different cultural issues, again, national issues, security issues even, where did we go wrong? How do we now have an entire political party, at least in terms of, I guess, elected representation, that are globalists rather than America first? They want open borders rather than secure ones. They can't, or I actually believe they can, but they refuse to differentiate the real and biological differences between men and women. They don't see the necessity or the urgency of maintaining the safeguarding of children or the importance of parental rights. No, they think that your children are actually their children. I mean, when did this shift, and I guess how is the better question, how did this shift happen?
Well, as a Christian, I believe that so much of it started when the left drove Christian ideology, conversations about the Christian faith, expressions of Christian faith from public discourse. I think that was one of the biggest tragedies. I think that too often culture is influencing the church instead of the church influencing culture. And I think that's abominable. I think that on top of all of that, you've got a generation of people. We used to elevate the rules of the game and then the players and the outcomes. And the Democrats and Republicans both wanted what's best for the American people. We just had different ways of getting there. Well, let's just jettison that approach. And now they're willing to undermine the rules of the game to achieve their desire to maintain power. And they're willing to destroy our country and our system of government on the way to doing that. And they no longer have any interest in protecting practical good. Woke utopian ideology prevails over any kind of desire to protect the practical good. So like while inflation is rampant, people can't afford shoes for their kids or breakfast, eggs and cereal to feed their kids before they go to school. The left is going to tell you that you can use a pronouns or somehow you're being discriminatory. President Putin in an attempt to pack this country with illegal aliens so that he can maintain power through allowing them to put people's lives at risk. I mean, 1,100 deaths more than 1,500 deaths from fentanyl exposure in 1 year alone in the state of Missouri. Now, 1,100 reported incidences of human trafficking. These are real life human harms that are occurring on the streets of Missouri every day, and Biden doesn't care because he wants to appear as if he's, letting that doing and these medical national borders don't matter. This is absolutely absurd. And again, it's dangerous, and that's why it's so important that we have government officials who are willing to fight back, like we have here in Missouri.
No doubt, like you are. Do you believe that the pendulum is swinging back? I look at what happened this week in terms of the SCOTUS rulings, a few different things, and I can only imagine that it's due time that truth and sanity restore themselves. But do you believe the pendulum is swinging back?
I think the pendulum is swinging back. How hard it swings back, how fast it swings back is going to be dependent upon our ability to do things like break up the censorship regime. And I'm not just talking about the government censorship regime. It is pernicious enough on its own, but we've also got to break up the tech's internal censorship regime. There's a reason that people if you're an alien that showed up on Earth, and watched the news or checked out social media, you would think that half of our population is transgender or homosexual. And certainly that's not the case. And it's because the manipulation of ideas and conversation on big tech is so bad that it overemphasizes some of these concepts in an attempt to reshape our culture. And I think it's important to expose that for what it is. Again, if the government were muting a phone call when we start talking about things the government didn't like, no one would tolerate it, but certainly we would know what was happening. You don't necessarily know when things are being de-emphasized or deplatformed or shadow banned on big tech. And it's not just the speaker's rights who are violated, it's the listeners as well. And that's fundamentally reshaping this culture in negative ways. It's our ability to move that pendulum in the proper direction is going to be dependent on our ability to break up some of that censorship.
No doubt. Anything on the horizon that we can expect to hear about from your office?
Yes, we're excited to be fighting this case, Missouri v. New York, again, to vindicate Missourians' rights to participate freely and fairly in the national election, to hear from and have access to President Trump. He should have not been tethered to a trial in Manhattan in silence in violation of the First Amendment, and that hunts Missourians, so that's important. We're looking at ways we can get involved to help increase prosecution of criminal aliens who are trafficking drugs and humans through the state of Missouri. So expect the movement from my office on that issue. We've got more than 50 lawsuits pending right now against the Biden administration's unconstitutional, illegal behavior. And on any given day, we can score wins on those cases. We've been fighting and winning for Missourians for the last 18 months and anticipate doing it for a long time in the future.
Gosh, more than 50 lawsuits just against the Biden admin. That is, again, I think that speaks to your dedication to preserving the Constitution, fighting for our freedoms as Missourians, but again, broader than that, as Americans. And so you set the standard. If every attorney general was like you, the country, but larger, the world would be a better place. And so we couldn't be more grateful for you. We will continue following along, continuing to open the X app every single day and see you announce that you are filing some lawsuit somewhere else over some issue. But we are so grateful for you. So thank you.
We'll keep up the good fight. I hope we can talk again soon.
I hope you're able to get all that. He talks fast, especially if you're someone who doesn't understand the legal jargon, legal mumbo jumbo. But really, I have so much respect and admiration. And honestly, I'm inspired by Attorney General Bailey. I hope and I pray that he becomes the U.S. Attorney General in November. I don't know if he or his family, he's a foster parent as well, he or his family would want to make the move to D.C., but I know the country would be grateful for him. I wish all AGs, actually, even some AGs with an R by their name, had the same tenacity and fortitude that AG Bailey does. The country and the world, for that matter, would be a much better place. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, check us out at OutKick.com. And I am wishing you the happiest of 4th of Julys. Be sure to celebrate this country. Remind yourself what it means to be an American, how fortunate we are to have the rights and the liberties that we have. See you guys soon. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. The fight to save women's sports and restore common sense is far from over, and I continue the conversation every week. So make sure to catch more content over here and subscribe to OutKick so you don't miss a thing.